In the universal competition between energy and entropy, life moves towards a greater degree of complexity. Simple chemicals become complex chemicals. Complex chemicals become bacteria who combine to become plants. They evolve to become simple animals who become complex life forms, who form groups, who become tribes, then chieftains, then cities, and then nations. At each stage of evolution, new agreements and new types of organisation need to be reached. This is a dynamic that still plays out in our recent history. For example, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the world started to shrink at an exponential rate. The geographic map of the world was complete, and now there was a race to finalise the political map of the world. The major powers embarked upon a race to claim sovereignty over land and resources in an effort to create nations under empire. All this came to a head when the land left to claim started to run out, and the assassination of the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand set events in motion that led to war that arguably continued on and off until the fall of Saigon in Vietnam in 1975. Throughout these tragic events, people saw the need to create an agreement, an organisation, a membership, and a series of activities that governs the relationship between states. The League of Nations proved to be a bit of a false start as the US didn't join, and the League's main aim, reducing armaments to the lowest level consistent with national security, failed when World War II broke out in 1939. So, the agreement that governs the relationship between states is the United Nations Charter signed in 1945. The organisation is the United Nations. The membership consists of 193, quote, peace-loving states which accept the obligations contained in the present charter and, in the judgment of the organisation, are able and willing to carry out these obligations. And the activities of the UN centre around fostering human rights, economic development, decolonisation, health, education, safety for refugees, trade and peacekeeping. So if the United Nations Charter governs the relationship of state to state, what agreement governs the relationship of state to individual? Since the dawn of time, man's inhumanity to man has been a feature of life for many millions as people in power have committed violation of human rights. Even after wars, the victors subject the vanquished to unimaginable pain and suffering. Death, destruction, torture, rape and pillage were the order of the day if you fought and lost pretty well any war you care to imagine. This was all brought to a head with the systematic enslavement, torture and genocide of anyone considered to be Untermensch, subhuman, by the Nazis. Perhaps at the other end of this scale, in 1961, 2 Portuguese students were sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for making a toast to freedom. Peter Benenson, a lawyer in London at the time, wrote a piece for the Observer newspaper called The Forgotten Prisoners. The article asked readers to write letters to show their support for the students. Amnesty International was born. The organisation was set up to coordinate letters of support for people whose human rights were being violated. So, the agreement developed to govern the relationship between the state and the individual is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The organisation that polices this is Amnesty International. The membership consists of a combination of international, regional, national and local activist groups, and the activities centre around fundraising, education and policing. So now we have agreements that govern the complex relationship between state and state and individual. Then, in the 70s and 80s, it started to become clear that our efforts to develop a certain standard of living were putting the planet in stress. Toxic patterns of production, development that resulted in massive pollution, the link between fossil fuels and climate change, and the growing scarcity of clean, safe water led to the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, commonly known as the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. After the summit, Maurice Strong, Secretary General of the Rio Summit, and Mikhail Gorbachev launched an initiative to develop the Earth Charter, a document that governs the relationship between the state, individual, and the Earth. Starting in 1997, the Earth Charter was drafted and designed with the input of thousands of people across the planet and then formally launched in the year 2000. So, the agreement that governs the relationship between people and the Earth is the Earth Charter. The organisation that works to promote this agreement is also called the Earth Charter. Its membership consists of over 2,000 organisations, including national and international associations, global institutions, and many thousands of individuals. And the activities centre around education, networking, initiatives, and reporting. My project will examine these three organisations, the United Nations, Amnesty International and the Earth Charter. They have all been established to in some way support and further an international soft law agreement. My aim is to compare and contrast these organisations in areas like aims and objectives, structure, fundraising and finances, methods of operations, membership, activity and track record, and then to draw some conclusions and recommendations that might increase support for the principles outlined in international agreements. The level of complexity in our way of life is increasing towards what is described by the American journalist, scholar and prize-winning author Robert Wright as the global brain. The transport, communications and technological revolutions have provided us with the tools to reach a global level of complexity, and now we need the organisation, the membership and the agreements and the activities to match.